Elena Vance. Kenzo's voice broke the rhythm of the rain. It was a deep, resonant sound that usually made her feel safe. Now, it felt like a door slamming shut. You stand accused of the highest treason, the poisoning of Elder Silas, the theft of the pack's sacred salts, and the betrayal of the Alpha's trust. Kenzo, she whispered, her voice cracking. I didn't do it. You know I couldn't. Beside Kenzo stood Serafina, the Beta's daughter. She was everything Elena wasn't. A fierce warrior, a shifter with a coat like polished coal, and a woman who knew exactly how to whisper into an Alpha's ear. Serafina stepped forward, her eyes brimming with performative tears. The evidence was in your room, Elena, Serafina said, her voice soft and lethal. The vial of wolfsbane, the maps to the rogue territories. Why? Was being the Alpha's mate not enough? Did you hate your own lack of a wolf so much that you wanted to destroy ours? Elena looked up at Kenzo, searching for the man who had once promised to protect her, even if her wolf never came. But Kenzo wasn't looking at her heart. He was looking at his pack, at the elders who demanded blood for the poisoning of their kin. His jaw was set, a muscle leaping in his cheek. The law of the silver moon is absolute, Kenzo said, his voice devoid of the warmth they had shared in the quiet hours of the night. A traitor who endangers the pack cannot remain. A wolfless girl who conspires with our enemies is no mate of mine. He reached out, his hand trembling so slightly only she could see it. He grabbed the lunar locket from the cushion. The chain snapped with a sharp metallic ping that sounded like a gunshot in the silence. Elena felt a physical jolt. That locket wasn't just jewelry, it was the anchor to her sanity. Please, she gasped, reaching out with mud-stained hands. Kenzo, that's all I have left. He didn't listen. He looked at the moonstone, then back at her, with a look of such profound disappointment that it burned worse than any silver blade. I, Kenzo Thorne, Alpha of the Silver Moon, hereby reject you, Elena Vance, as my mate and my Luna, he announced, the words carrying the weight of an Alpha's command. I sever the bond. I cast you out. You are no longer of this blood. You are nothing. The rejection hit her like a physical blow to the stomach. The invisible threads of the mate bond, the ones that had hummed in the back of her mind for 3 years, didn't just break. They shattered. It felt like her soul was being flayed, the warmth of his presence replaced by a void so cold it made her lungs seize. She collapsed into the mud, retching, her fingers clawing at the earth. The crowd murmured, some in pity, most in disgust. Kenzo turned his back on her, handing the locket to Serafina. Prepare the stand, he ordered the executioner. We end this before the sun sets. As the guards dragged Elena toward the wooden platform, the rain began to turn to sleet. Her vision blurred, but as she was forced down onto the cold, hard oak of the execution block, she felt a strange sensation. The locket, now in Serafina's hand just a few feet away, began to glow. Not with the soft light of the moon, but with a fierce, molten gold. And for the first time in 20 years, the silence inside Elena's head wasn't empty anymore. Deep within the marrow of her bones, something that had been sleeping behind 1,000 years of ice finally opened its eyes. It wasn't a wolf's howl she heard. It was the sound of a star catching fire. Elena looked at Kenzo's retreating back, her voice a low, guttural rasp that stopped him in his tracks. Kenzo, she said, and for the first time, her voice didn't tremble. You didn't just break a bond, you broke a seal. Kenzo stopped. The rain seemed to freeze in midair for a heartbeat, the word seal echoing against the stone walls of the surrounding barracks. He turned slowly, his black executioner's coat billowing like a shroud. His eyes, usually a piercing, intelligent blue, were clouded with a mixture of grief he refused to name and the cold iron of his resolve. A seal? Kenzo repeated, his voice low. Elena, enough. Do not cling to ghost stories to save yourself. It only makes the end more bitter. He's right, you know, Serafina chimed in, her hand tightening around the lunar locket. She felt the heat radiating from the stone, a scorching, unnatural warmth that made her palms sweat. But she didn't let go. She couldn't. You were tested every year since you were 13. No wolf, no shift, no scent. You are a human anomaly in a bloodline of warriors. There is no seal, only the silence of a failed spirit. Elena didn't look at Serafina. She kept her gaze fixed on Kenzo. She watched the way he adjusted his stance, the way his alpha aura flared to suppress the unease rippling through the crowd. He was doing what he thought was right for the Silver Moon. He was sacrificing a weak link to prove his strength. That was his great mistake. He believed that power was only found in the teeth and the claw, never in the soul that commanded them. Duncan, Kenzo signaled the executioner. Duncan was a massive man, his face hidden behind a heavy leather hood. He carried an axe forged from pure silver, a metal that was poison to their kind, meant to ensure that even the strongest healing factor could not mend what the blade severed. He stepped forward, his boots heavy on the wooden planks. Place your head down, Elena, Duncan grunted, his voice thick with a strange, sudden hesitation. He too felt the change in the air. The scent of rain and mud was being replaced by something sharp and ancient. The smell of ozone before a lightning strike, mixed with the fragrance of crushed white lilies. Elena obeyed. She pressed her cheek against the wet, stained oak. She could see the grain of the wood, the dark spots where others had met their end. She felt the heavy weight of the silver axe being raised behind her. Wait, a voice whispered in the back of her mind. It wasn't her voice. It was deep, melodic, and hummed with the resonance of 1,000 years of moonlight. Let the silver touch the stone. Let the lie finish its work so the truth can begin. In the front row of the crowd, a young boy, an Omega, who often helped Elena in the infirmary, began to cry. The sound was a lonely, piercing note in the storm. Kenzo flinched at the sound, his hand twitching toward his sword. But he did not stop the proceedings. He stood like a statue, a man who had already buried his heart. For the crime of treason, Kenzo announced, his voice booming over the thunder. I, Alpha Kenzo Thorn, carry out the sentence of the moon. He dropped his hand. The silver axe swung. It was a perfect lethal arc. The crowd held its collective breath. Serafina's lips curled into a tiny, triumphant smirk. But the sound that followed wasn't the wet thud of steel hitting wood. It was the sound of a bell being struck by a mountain. A massive, deafening clang rippled out from the execution stand. A shockwave so powerful it knocked the guards off their feet and shattered the windows of the nearby Great Hall. Kenzo stumbled back, shielding his eyes, as a pillar of golden light erupted from the execution block. It wasn't the pale, sickly light of a dying flame. It was the blinding, majestic radiance of a newborn star. When the light faded enough for the pack to see, a collective gasp went up that seemed to suck the very air out of the clearing. The silver axe lay in pieces on the platform. The heavy blade had shattered into 100 jagged shards, as if it had struck something harder than diamond. Duncan was staring at his empty, scorched palms, his leather hood singed. Elena was still kneeling, but she was no longer bowed. She stood up slowly, her movements fluid and possessed of a terrifying grace. The heavy iron chains on her wrists didn't just break. They dissolved, turning into fine gray ash that was swept away by the wind. But it was her eyes that stopped Kenzo's heart. They weren't hazel anymore. They were liquid gold, glowing with an inner luminescence that seemed to pierce through the very souls of everyone watching. The silver didn't kill me, Kenzo, Elena said. Her voice was layered now, her human tone underscored by a harmonic growl that vibrated in the chests of every wolf present. It thanked me for releasing it. She turned her head toward Seraphina. The beta's daughter was trembling, the lunar locket in her hand now glowing so brightly it was painful to look at. "You wanted to see my wolf?" Elena asked, taking a single step forward. The wooden planks of the platform groaned under her feet, not from her weight, but from the sheer pressure of her presence. "You wanted to see what happens when you push a human girl until she has nothing left to lose?" The rain didn't just stop, it evaporated. A circle of dry ground began to expand outward from Elena, the heat from her skin turning the freezing sludge into white steam. Kenzo found his voice, though it sounded small and hollow to his own ears. "Elena, what is this? What have you done?" "I didn't do anything, Kenzo," she said, looking at him with a pity that hurt worse than her anger. "My mother didn't leave me a locket to remember her by. She left me a prison to keep the world safe from what I am, and you just gave me the key." She reached out, and the lunar locket flew from Seraphina's hand as if pulled by a magnet. It snapped back into Elena's palm, the silver casing melting away to reveal the true stone within. Not a moonstone, but a solar core, a fragment of the first dawn. Elena closed her eyes, and the world went silent. "Valeriana," she whispered. The name was a command. Behind Elena's silhouette, a shadow began to rise. It grew taller than the execution stand, wider than the barracks. It was the shape of a wolf, but it was massive, its fur composed of shimmering metallic white and tipped with the same molten gold as her eyes. This wasn't a pack wolf. This was a golden Luna, a creature of myth, the direct descendant of the moon goddess's first breath, a wolf that alphas were born to serve, not led. The golden Luna let out a roar, not a howl, but a roar of pure primordial power. The force of it sent Kenzo to his knees. It wasn't a choice. His own wolf, the fierce alpha of the silver moon, was screaming inside his head, demanding that he bow. Kenzo Thorne, the strongest alpha in a century, looked up from the mud at the woman he had just rejected. He saw the truth in the golden light, and in that moment, he realized his mistake wasn't just a matter of law. He had just tried to execute the sun. The silence that followed the roar was heavier than the storm. It was a psychic weight, a divine pressure that forced every werewolf within the silver moon territory to their bellies. This wasn't the dominance of a stronger alpha. It was the return of a progenitor. Kenzo Thorne, a man who had never bowed to anyone in his 30 years of life, felt his joints locking. His wolf, a massive black beast named Cinder, was no longer snarling. Inside Kenzo's mind, Cinder was whimpering, tucking his tail, and pressing his spirit against the floor of Kenzo's consciousness. "Queen," the wolf whispered in a voice of pure terror and awe. "The First Mother has returned." Elena, or the being that was now Elena, stood at the center of the light. The massive golden wolf, Valeriana, didn't stand on 4 legs like a common beast. She stood with a terrifying bipedal grace before dropping into a crouch that leveled her glowing eyes with Kenzo's. Her fur wasn't just hair. It was a coat of living starlight, each strand shimmering with a metallic luster that the rain couldn't dampen. "You looked for a weakness, Kenzo," Elena's voice echoed, not from her throat, but inside the minds of everyone present. It was a clear, resonant sound that tasted like honey and felt like a blade. "You looked at a seed and called it a stone because it wouldn't grow in your shadow." Kenzo tried to speak. His throat was dry, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. "Elena, the laws, the poison." "The poison," Elena repeated. She turned her golden gaze toward Seraphina. The beta's daughter was trying to crawl away, her hand scraping against the muddy wooden planks. The lunar locket, The solar core was still pulsing in Elena's hand, and as Elena pointed the stone toward Seraphina, the light changed. It shifted from a warm gold to a harsh, revealing violet. Under the violet rays, a stain appeared on Seraphina's fine silk sleeves. It was a glowing, iridescent residue that hadn't been visible to the naked eye. Wolfsbane Extract, Marco, the pack's lead healer and Kenzo's most trusted advisor, gasped from the front row. He had been forced to his knees like the rest, but his eyes were wide with professional horror. It leaves a mineral trace that only pure lunar light can reveal. Seraphina, you said you hadn't touched the vial. The pack erupted in a low, dangerous murmur. The submission held their bodies, but their minds were beginning to reel. "She framed me!" Seraphina shrieked, her voice high and brittle. "She's using dark magic! Look at her! That's not a wolf, that's a monster! She's bewitching the light!" But the solar core didn't lie. Elena walked toward her, each step cracking the wood of the execution stand. She didn't strike. She simply stood over the girl who had spent years making her life a misery. "The locket was a seal," Elena said softly. "My mother knew that the golden blood was too strong for this era. She bound it in silver and stone, hoping I could live a quiet, human life. But a seal requires a catalyst to break. It requires the ultimate betrayal of the heart." Elena looked back at Kenzo. The rejection bond, the void in her chest where his soul used to be, was still there, but it was being filled with the molten power of Valeriana. "You rejected me because you thought I was a burden," Elena said. "You broke the bond to protect your pride. In doing so, you broke the only thing keeping the sun from rising. You didn't execute a traitor, Kenzo. You murdered the only woman who would have died to keep your secrets." Kenzo's face went pale. The memories flooded back. The way Elena had stayed up all night to tend to his wounds after the great hunt. The way she had balanced the pack's ledgers in silence while he took the credit for their prosperity. He had called her wolfless as an insult, never realizing she was simply more. "Elena, please," Kenzo rasped, finally managing to find his feet through sheer agony of will. He reached out a hand, his fingers trembling. "I was wrong. The elders. They pressured me. Silas was dying. I thought I was saving the pack from a rot." "You were the rot," Elena said, her golden eyes flashing. She turned away from him, facing the hundreds of wolves who had watched her be dragged to the block. She raised the solar core high above her head. The clouds above the silver moon territory began to swirl, a massive eye of gold opening in the gray sky. "I am Elena Vance, daughter of the dawn," she proclaimed, "and I recognize no alpha who bows to a lie. I recognize no pack that feeds on its own. Today, the silver moon falls." "No," Kenzo cried out, but it was too late. Elena didn't attack the wolves. She didn't tear into their throats. Instead, she slammed the solar cord down onto the executioner's block. A pulse of energy, pure, white, and undeniable, ripped through the clearing. It hit the pack like a physical wave. For a moment, every wolf felt a searing heat in their chest, followed by a profound, terrifying silence. One by one, the wolves began to gasp. My link," Marco whispered, clutching his chest. "The pack link. It's gone." Kenzo fell to his knees again, clutching his head. The psychic web that connected an alpha to his pack, the source of his power and their unity, had been cauterized. Elena hadn't killed them. She had severed their connection to the silver moon. She had made them all wolfless in spirit, stripping away the collective power they had used to bully her. She looked down at the shattered remains of the locket. The stone was gone, its energy dispersed into the atmosphere, creating a shimmering veil of gold that hung over the forest. "I'm leaving," Elena said, her voice now fading as the golden light around her softened, returning her to her human form. Though she remained tall, radiant and untouched by the mud. Do not follow me. Do not hunt me. For if I see the silver moon again, I will not bring the light. I will bring the fire. She turned and began to walk toward the dark tree line of the forbidden rogue territories. Elena, Kenzo screamed, the sound tearing from his throat like a death sob. Wait. I can fix this. We are still mates. The moon goddess chose us. Elena paused at the edge of the clearing. She didn't turn around. The moon goddess chose a girl who loved you, she said quietly. But you killed her on that block, and the queen who rose in her place, she doesn't even know your name. As she stepped into the shadows of the ancient trees, the golden veil behind her thickened, turning the boundary of the silver moon into an impenetrable wall of light. Kenzo sat in the mud, surrounded by a pack that could no longer feel his heartbeat, staring at the empty execution stand where he had lost the world. The boundary of the rogue territories was marked by a shift in the very air. Behind Elena, the silver moon territory smelled of pine, cold rain, and the sterile metallic scent of an alpha's order. Before her, the dark forest breathed. It was a thick, heavy scent of damp earth, ancient cedar, and something wilder, the smell of wolves who had forgotten the taste of a home-cooked meal. Elena walked until her feet bled, then walked until the golden fire in her veins healed them, then walked some more. She was no longer shivering. The heat of Valeriana was a low, constant hum beneath her skin, a warm hearth in the middle of a blizzard. She wasn't alone for long. The rogues didn't approach like pack wolves. There was no formal challenge, no howling to announce their presence. They moved like shadows through the undergrowth, gaunt, ragged shapes, with eyes that burned with the yellow fire of the feral drift. Without an alpha's link to anchor them, a rogue's wolf would eventually begin to swallow their human mind, leaving them as nothing more than starving beasts. A massive, gray-furred wolf with a mangled ear stepped into the path. Its ribs were visible beneath a coat matted with burrs and dried blood. It snarled, a wet, desperate sound. "Careful, little one," Valeriana whispered in her mind. "They are not evil. They are simply empty." Elena stopped. She didn't shift. She didn't need to. She simply let a fraction of her aura bleed out, a soft, golden ripple that acted like a physical weight. The gray wolf's snarl died in its throat. Its yellow eyes widened, and for the first time in years, the madness in them flickered and died. It lowered its head, not in submission to a master, but in relief. "You're hungry," Elena said softly. She reached out her hand. The wolf flinched, then slowly, agonizingly, pressed its cold, wet nose into her palm. As she touched it, a spark of golden light passed from her skin to the wolf's. The creature let out a long, shuddering breath and collapsed at her feet, finally falling into a peaceful, dreamless sleep. "A dangerous habit, Your Highness. Feeding the strays." The voice was like grinding stones, deep and gravelly, coming from the shadows of a towering redwood. Elena looked up. Standing on a moss-covered ridge was a man who looked less like a king and more like a mountain that had learned to walk. He was tall, his shoulders broad enough to block out the meager light filtering through the canopy. He wore simple, dark leather armor, scarred by claws and time. His hair was black and long, tied back with a leather cord, and a jagged white scar ran from his brow down to his jaw, cutting through the corner of a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. This was Draven Blackwood, the rogue king, the man mothers in the Silver Moon Pack used to frighten their children into staying in bed. "I'm not a highness," Elena said, her voice steady despite the way the air seemed to thicken around him. "I'm just a girl who was supposed to be dead." Draven hopped down from the ridge, landing with a silence that defied his size. He walked toward her, his gray eyes, the color of a winter sea, scanning her from her golden eyes to her mud-stained clothes. He stopped just outside her personal space, sniffing the air. "The scout said a star fell into the woods," Draven said. He looked at the sleeping rogue at her feet. "I didn't believe them. The Golden Luna is a bedtime story. A myth used to keep alphas in line." "Kenzo Thorne didn't think it was a story," Elena replied. Draven's expression darkened at the mention of Kenzo. "Thorne is a boy playing at being a man. He wants to own things, the land, the law, and apparently, a woman who was too big for his cage." He stepped closer, his presence not demanding, but inviting. "I felt the link snap, you know. All of us did. 300 rogues in this forest suddenly felt the silence in their heads stop screaming. That was you." Elena looked down at her hands. "I didn't mean to. I just wanted it to stop. The betrayal, the lies, the noise." "In this forest, we value the noise," Draven said, and for a moment, his stern face softened. "It's how we know we're still alive. But what you did, you gave them a moment of peace. That's a rare currency here." He turned and gestured toward the deeper part of the woods. "My camp is a mile north. It's not a palace. It's a collection of broken things trying to stay whole. But no alpha will cross my border without losing his head. You can stay. Not as a guest, and certainly not as a mate. As a soul who needs to decide what she wants to be when the light fades." "Why help me?" Elena asked. "You don't even know me." Draven paused, looking back at her over his shoulder. The scar on his face twitched. "Because I know what it's like to be executed by the people you swore to protect. And because I've spent 10 years waiting for someone to prove that the moon goddess hasn't completely abandoned the outcasts." As they walked toward the camp, Elena felt the solar core, the power she had absorbed, pulsing in rhythm with the forest. She realized that the escalation wasn't just about Kenzo's pursuit. It was about the fact that she was now a beacon. By the time they reached the settlement, a sprawling network of cabins and tents built into the cliffs, the sun had set. But the camp wasn't dark. Everywhere Elena stepped, the plants seemed to glow with a soft bioluminescence, responding to her presence. Draven led her to a small, clean cabin at the edge of a waterfall. "Sleep," he commanded. "Tomorrow, the world will come for you. Alphas, the council, the hunters, they'll all want to put a collar on the legend." Elena sat on the edge of the simple wooden bed, watching the moon through the window. "Let them come," she whispered. She closed her eyes, but sleep didn't come. Instead, she felt a sharp, stabbing pain in her chest, a residual echo of the mate bond. Far to the south, she could feel Kenzo's intent. He wasn't mourning. He wasn't repenting. He was mobilizing. She could feel his rage, his desperation, and most of all, his possessiveness. He was calling in favors from the neighboring Blood River and Stone Claw packs. He was telling them she was a danger to the species, a cursed entity that needed to be contained. He was coming for her, and he was bringing an army. Elena stood up and walked to the door. Draven was sitting by a fire outside, sharpening a massive black iron blade. He looked up as she emerged. "He's coming, isn't he?" Draven asked, not needing to be told. "Yes," Elena said, her eyes turning a molten, fierce gold. "And he's not coming alone." Draven stood up, the firelight catching the steel in his eyes. He sheathed his sword with a slow, deliberate click. "Good. I've been looking for an excuse to show the Silver Moon why we don't live in houses with fences." But the suspense wasn't just in the coming war. As Elena looked at Draven, she felt a different kind of spark, not the forced, biological pull of a mate bond, but a choice. A human, terrifying choice. The next 3 weeks in the dark forest were not spent in hiding, but in a brutal, beautiful awakening. Draven Blackwood did not treat Elena like a goddess or a porcelain doll. He treated her like a warrior whose edge had been dulled by years of neglect. Every morning, before the mist had even cleared from the waterfall, they were on the training flats, a patch of packed earth overlooking the Valley of the Rogues. "Don't rely on the light, Elena," Draven grunted, parrying her strike with his black iron practice blade. The ring of wood on wood echoed through the trees. "The light is a gift from the moon, but your feet, your breath, your intent, those belong to you. If the light fails, what is left of Elena Vance?" Elena wiped sweat from her brow, her chest heaving. Her golden eyes were dimmed to a soft amber, a sign of her effort. "There was nothing left of her on that stand, Draven. I thought she died there." Draven stopped, his sword lowered. He walked toward her, his movements possessing a heavy, grounding grace. He reached out, not to strike, but to place a calloused hand over her heart. Through the thin linen of her tunic, the solar core pulsed, a steady, warm rhythm. "She didn't die," Draven said softly. "She just finally got loud enough to be heard. Now, show me that girl. The one who survived 20 years in a pack that hated her without ever becoming like them." They sparred again, but this time, something shifted. Elena stopped trying to control the power of Valeriana and started letting it flow into her movements. She wasn't just a human fighting a wolf. She was the balance between the two. When she moved, she was a blur of gold. When she struck, the air hummed. But the most profound change wasn't in Elena's combat skills. It was in the rogues. As Elena spent more time in the camp, the feral drift began to recede from the population. Rogues who had spent years in a fog of animalistic rage were waking up. They began to repair the cabins, to organize hunts that weren't just desperate scrambles for survival, and to sit together around fires at night. The camp was no longer a collection of broken things. It was becoming the first rogue pack in history, anchored not by an alpha's dominance, but by the Golden Luna's peace. "You're a nexus," Draven observed one evening as they watched the children of the camp, once silent and fearful, playing a game of tag near the stream. "You aren't demanding their loyalty. You're just giving them the space to be human again." "It feels right," Elena said, leaning her head against Draven's shoulder. It was a simple gesture, one born of shared respect and growing affection. In the Silver Moon, everything was about the hierarchy. Here, it's just about the life. Draven didn't pull away. He draped an arm around her, his scent, cedar, cold steel, and something ancient, enveloping her. "The hierarchy is coming for us, Elena. My scouts say Kenzo has crossed the Blue River. He's brought Alpha Riker of the Blood River and Alpha Silas's son from the Stone Claw. They formed a Tri-Alpha alliance." Elena felt a cold shiver. "Riker is a butcher. He doesn't take prisoners." "He won't have the chance," Draven said, his voice dropping an octave into a low, dangerous growl. "They think they're coming to put down a wild entity. They have no idea they're walking into a kingdom." The escalation reached its peak 3 days later. The air in the dark forest turned stagnant. The birds stopped singing, and the very trees seemed to huddle together. At the southern border, where the ancient redwoods met the manicured plains of the Packlands, a great horn sounded. It was the call of the Tri-Alpha Alliance, a demand for parley or total war. Elena stood at the edge of the cliff with Draven. Below, at the forest's edge, she could see them. Hundreds of armored wolves, their banners, silver, crimson, and slate gray, snapping in the wind. At the head of the formation, mounted on a massive black stallion, was Kenzo Thorn. He looked different. Even from a distance, Elena could see the toll the last month had taken. His face was gaunted, his hair unkempt, and the blue of his eyes had turned into a frantic, burning sapphire. He wasn't the composed alpha anymore. He was a man possessed by a singular, hollow obsession. Beside him, bound in heavy silver chains and being dragged behind a chariot, was Seraphina. Her once beautiful face was bruised, her spirit clearly broken by the very man she had tried to manipulate. Kenzo had brought her as a peace offering, a sacrificial lamb to prove his justice. "Elena Vance!" Kenzo's voice was amplified by a megaphone, booming through the trees. "I know you are there. I have the traitor. I have the truth. Come out, and we can end this madness. The moon goddess demands our reconciliation." Draven looked at Elena, his hand resting on the hilt of his black blade. "Your move, Queen. We can stay behind the light, or we can show them what the dark forest has forged." Elena felt Valeriana stir within her, not with rage, but with a cold, absolute clarity. She looked at the solar core in her hand, then tucked it away. She didn't need the stone to be the light anymore. "I'm done talking through trees," Elena said. She stepped off the cliff. She didn't fall. A path of shimmering golden light caught her feet, a bridge of starlight that descended from the heights of the rogue kingdom down to the muddy flats where the alphas waited. As she descended, Draven and 300 rogues emerged from the shadows of the trees behind her. They weren't ragged anymore. They were clean, focused, and armed with weapons forged from the very iron Draven had been sharpening for years. The Tri-Alpha Alliance faltered. The soldiers began to whisper, their horses rearing in fear. Elena landed on the grass, 20 feet from Kenzo. She looked at him, really looked at him, and felt nothing. No spark of the mate bond. No echo of the girl who had loved him. Just the cold realization that he was a man who only valued power when he could control it. "I'm here, Kenzo," Elena said, her voice carrying without effort. "But the girl you're looking for? She's not in this forest!" Kenzo dismounted, his movements jerky. He gestured wildly toward the chained Seraphina. "Look, I've punished her. I've spent every day searching the archives, Elena. We can be Alpha and Luna again. The Pax will bow to us. You are the most powerful weapon our species has ever seen. We can rule the world." Elena looked at Seraphina, who was weeping in the mud, then back at Kenzo. "You still think of me as a weapon," Elena said quietly. "You didn't come here to find your mate. You came here to reclaim your status." Kenzo's face twisted. The obsession in his eyes flared into something uglier. "You are mine by divine right, Elena. I am the Alpha of the Silver Moon. I will not let a pack of rogues and a scarred exile steal what belongs to me." He raised his hand, signaling the Tri-Alpha army to advance. "If you won't come willingly," Kenzo roared, his voice breaking, "then I will burn this forest until there is nothing left but the ash of your pride." The Tri-Alpha Alliance charged. Hundreds of wolves shifted in midair, a sea of fur and teeth rushing toward the rogue line. Draven stepped up beside Elena, his own aura, a dark, grounding shadow, flaring to meet her light. "Ready?" he asked. Elena didn't answer with words. She let the light of the solar core explode outward, but this time, she didn't just push them back. She began to change. The transformation of a werewolf is usually a symphony of agony, the sound of femurs snapping, the wet tear of muscle stretching, and the desperate guttural screams of a human soul being eclipsed by the beast. But as the Tri-Alpha Alliance surged forward, Elena Vance did not scream. She stood at the center of the battlefield, the solar core glowing with such intensity in her palm that it looked as if she were holding a piece of the sun. As the first line of Blood River warriors reached her, their claws extended and their jaws snapping, Elena simply closed her eyes and let go of the last thread of her human restraint. There was no sound of breaking bones. Instead, there was a hum, a deep, resonant vibration that seemed to come from the earth itself. A pillar of golden light erupted from her, so hot it turned the muddy grass to steam, and so bright it blinded the charging wolves. When the light faded, the girl was gone. In her place stood Valeriana. She was nearly 12 feet tall at the shoulder, her fur a shimmering metallic white that transitioned into molten gold at the tips of her ears and tail. Her eyes were not the predatory yellow of a rogue or the blue of the silver moon. They were twin stars of liquid gold. She didn't look like a predator. She looked like a monument. The effect was instantaneous. The charging wolves didn't hit her. They recoiled. It was biological. The Golden Luna was the direct lineage of the moon goddess, the first of their kind. Every wolf on the field felt a crushing weight in their chest, a primal command to kneel. "What is this?" Alpha Riker of the Blood River snarled, though his wolf was whimpering in the back of his mind. He shifted into a massive, scarred red wolf, trying to fight the urge to submit. "Kill it! It's just an illusion!" Riker lunged, his jaws aiming for Valeriana's throat. The Golden Luna didn't even snarl. She moved with a speed that defied her size, a blur of starlight. She didn't use her teeth. She used the flat of her massive paw. With a single, effortless swat, she sent the Blood River Alpha flying 50 yards across the field, crashing into the stone cliffs of the Rogue Kingdom. He didn't get up. Kenzo stood frozen. He saw his ally fall. He saw his warriors dropping to their knees, one by one, their heads bowed in involuntary submission. "Elena!" Kenzo's voice was a ragged sob. He shifted into his black wolf, Cinder. He didn't attack. He crawled toward her, his belly in the mud. "Mate," his wolf projected, a desperate, pathetic whine. "Mine, my Luna, come back to the den." Valeriana looked down at him. There was no hatred in her gaze. Hatred was too heavy a burden for a queen to carry. There was only the cold, hard clarity of a truth realized too late. "You called me wolfless." Valeriana's voice echoed in Kenzo's mind, layered with the authority of 10,000 years. "Because you could not hear the song I was singing. You called me a traitor because you could not control the truth. You do not want a mate, Kenzo Thorne. You want a mirror to reflect your own ego." Kenzo growled, the obsession finally snapping his logic. If he couldn't have her as his Luna, he would break her, so no one else could. He lunged, his teeth snapping inches from her golden fur. But someone was there to meet him. Draven Blackwood, still in his human form, but moving with the lethal precision of a man who had survived a decade of exile, intercepted Kenzo. His black iron blade caught Kenzo's claws, the sparks flying in the dim light. "She told you once," Draven said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "The girl who loved you died on that block. You're fighting a goddess now, boy, and you're losing." Kenzo roared, trying to bypass Draven to get to Elena. But the rogues had joined the fray. They weren't fighting like traditional packs. They fought as a unit, protecting one another, fueled by the stabilizing peace of Elena's aura. The Tri-Alpha Alliance was in shambles. Without their pack link to guide them, and with their alphas falling, the warriors began to retreat into the trees. Valeriana turned her attention back to the center of the field. She walked toward the chained Seraphina. The Beta's daughter looked up, her eyes wide with a terror so deep she had lost the ability to scream. She saw the Golden Luna, the very entity she had tried to steal through poison and lies. Valeriana leaned down, her warm, starlit breath ruffling Seraphina's hair. "You sought to poison a lineage," the wolf spoke. "You sought to build a throne on the bones of an innocent. The moon goddess sees the heart, Seraphina, and yours is a hollow thing." Valeriana didn't bite. She didn't kill. She simply touched the solar core to Seraphina's forehead. A soft, white light enveloped the girl. Serafina let out a long, shuddering gasp. It wasn't a death. It was a stripping. The wolf spirit inside Serafina, the source of her pride and her power, simply dissolved. She wasn't dead, but she was now what she had mocked Elena for being. She was truly, irrevocably wolfless. Serafina collapsed into a heap, her eyes vacant, the weight of her own actions finally settling on her shoulders. Kenzo, seeing the woman he had chosen over Elena reduced to nothing, let out a howl of pure, unadulterated anguish. He shifted back to his human form, naked and shivering in the mud. He looked at Elena, who was now shifting back to her human form as well. She stood before him, draped in a cloak of golden light. She looked at the man who had been her world, and for the first time, she felt the last thread of the mate bond vanish. It didn't break this time. It simply evaporated, as if it had never existed. "It's over, Kenzo," Elena said. Her voice was quiet, human, and filled with a peace that terrified him more than her roar ever could. "Take your people. Go back to the Silver Moon. Build a world that doesn't require an executioner to keep the peace." "I can't," Kenzo whispered, reaching out a muddy hand. "Without the bond, I'm nothing. The pack, they won't follow a man who lost his Luna." "Then learn to be a man worth following," Elena said. She turned her back on him and walked toward Draven. The rogue king was waiting for her at the edge of the trees, his black blade sheathed. He didn't bow. He didn't worship. He simply opened his arms. Elena walked into them, burying her face in his neck. The scent of cedar and iron was the only home she needed. Behind them, the Tri-Alpha army melted away into the night, leaving the wolfless Alpha and his broken traitor alone on the field. The golden Luna had risen, and the world would never be the same. But as Elena clung to Draven, she felt a sudden, sharp pang of something she didn't expect. A ripple in the air, a shadow that didn't belong to the forest. The Alphas were gone, but the Council of Elders, the ancient, shadowy rulers of the supernatural world, had been watching. And they did not like it when a legend refused to be caged. The aftermath of a battle is rarely the end of a war. It is merely the moment the silence returns to see what has been broken. In the weeks following the defeat of the Tri-Alpha Alliance, the Dark Forest underwent a metamorphosis. It was no longer a place of shadows and starvation. Under Elena's presence, the trees grew taller, their leaves shimmering with a faint, silvery dust. The bioluminescence she had sparked didn't fade. It deepened, turning the rogue settlement into a sanctuary that looked less like a camp and more like a cathedral of living wood. But the world outside was not at peace. One evening, as the first snow of winter began to dust the redwoods, a vehicle appeared at the border. It wasn't a warhorse or a chariot, but a sleek, black limousine with tinted windows, a jarring intrusion of modern, sterile authority into the wild heart of the forest. The emissary who stepped out was not a wolf. He was a high elf, a representative of the supernatural council, the 12 ancient beings who governed the hidden world from a fortress of glass and white stone called the Citadel. "Elena Vance," the emissary said, his voice like dry parchment. "The council has observed the disruption of the balance. The rise of a golden Luna is not a pack matter. It is a global security concern. You are summoned to the Citadel to be registered, analyzed, and placed under the stewardship of the High Elders." Draven stood beside Elena, his hand white-knuckled on the hilt of his blade. "She is not a concern to be managed. She is the queen of this forest." "She is a biological anomaly," the emissary replied, unmoved. "And if she refuses, the council will authorize a full-scale purge of the rogue territories. We will not allow a rogue power to destabilize the hierarchy." Elena looked at the emissary, then at the rogues who were watching from the trees. She saw the fear in their eyes, the fear that their newfound peace was just a dream before a different kind of execution. "I will go," Elena said. "Elena, no," Draven whispered, grabbing her arm. "It's a cage. They'll never let you leave." "They won't have a choice," Elena said, her golden eyes flashing with a soft, steady light. "I didn't rise to hide in the trees, Draven. I rose to change the law." The journey to the Citadel was a blur of steel and glass. Elena was led into a grand, circular hall where 12 elders sat on a raised dais. Among them sat representatives of every species: vampires, sorcerers, and ancient alphas. In the center of the hall, standing in a circle of salt meant to dampen magic, was Kenzo Thorn. He looked like a ghost. He had been stripped of his title by the council, his pack divided among neighboring territories. He was there to testify against her, to provide the evidence that she was too dangerous to be free. Alpha Thorn, the head elder, an ancient werewolf named Aurelius, spoke. "Tell us of the entity known as Valeriana. Is she a danger to the species?" Kenzo looked at Elena. He saw her standing there, not in chains, but in a simple dress of white linen, her hair braided with silver vines Draven had crafted for her. She didn't look like a monster. She looked like the truth he had been too small to hold. Kenzo took a breath. "She is a danger," he said, his voice hollow. The elders murmured in agreement. "She is a danger to every man who thinks he can own the moon," Kenzo continued, his voice suddenly gaining a strange, ragged strength. "She is a danger to every law that executes the innocent to protect the powerful. I am the evidence of her power, not because she destroyed me, but because she showed me that I was already empty." He looked at Elena, a tear tracing a path through the dust on his cheek. "She is the only thing in this world that is truly free. And if you try to cage her, you will not be analyzing a wolf. You will be dissecting the light itself." The hall fell into a stunned silence. Aurelius stood up, his face purple with rage. "Insolence! Guards, seize them both! We will contain the anomaly by force if necessary." The elite guards of the Citadel, warriors armored in silver-threaded Kevlar, rushed the floor. Elena didn't shift. She didn't need Valeriana's claws for this. She simply opened her palms. The solar core inside her didn't explode this time. It breathed. A pulse of pure white radiance expanded from her, not hitting the guards, but passing through them. The silver in their armor didn't burn. It simply turned to lead, becoming heavy and useless. The salt circle around her evaporated into steam. Elena floated inches off the ground, her eyes two burning suns. "I am the Golden Luna," her voice echoed, vibrating the very foundations of the glass fortress. "I do not serve your council. I do not recognize your stewardship. The era of the cage is over. From this day forward, the Dark Forest is the kingdom of the moon. We are the Eclipse Pack, the home for the broken, the discarded, and the free." She looked at the elders, and for a moment, they saw the thousands of years of history behind her eyes. They saw the first dawn. They saw the end of their era. "If you seek to purge us," Elena stated, "you will find that the light does not fear the dark. It creates it." She turned and walked out of the hall. No one dared to stop her. 6 months later, the first winter of the Eclipse Pack was coming to a close. Elena stood on the balcony of the new pack house, a structure built of stone and living wood that overlooked the valley. The snow was melting, revealing patches of vibrant green grass that shouldn't have been able to grow in this climate. Draven walked out behind her, wrapping a thick fur cloak around her shoulders. He leaned in, his scarred face softening as he kissed her temple. "The delegates from the southern packs have arrived," he said. "They aren't here for war. They're here to ask if they can send their Omegas to our school." Elena smiled, leaning back into his strength. "The world is learning, Draven. It's learning because of you," he whispered. Elena looked out toward the border of the forest. In the distance, standing in the shadows of the ancient trees, was a solitary figure in a gray cloak. It was Kenzo. He had refused to take back his alpha title. Instead, he had become a wanderer, a silent guardian of the borderlands. He didn't approach the settlement. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He simply stood watch, ensuring that no hunter or rogue scout crossed into Elena's territory. It was a quiet, lonely penance. Elena felt a pang of sadness for the boy she had once loved, but it was a distant, faded thing, like the memory of a dream. She didn't hate him. She simply hoped that one day he would find a way to forgive himself. She turned her gaze back to the valley. The children were playing in the melting snow. The rogues were singing as they prepared for the spring hunt. And beside her, a man who had been a king of exiles was now a partner in a new world. The golden Luna closed her eyes and felt the steady, peaceful hum of the world. The execution stand was 1,000 miles away. The rejection was a lifetime ago. She wasn't a weapon. She wasn't a victim. She was home. The first true spring of the Eclipse Pack did not arrive with a roar, but with a whisper. As the last of the stubborn mountain snow retreated, it left behind a valley transformed. The redwoods, once dark and forbidding, now pulsed with a gentle amber light that seemed to emanate from the sap itself. The air didn't just carry the scent of pine and earth, it carried a sense of equilibrium. In the town square, a place built of fallen timber and smoothed river stone, there was no execution block. Instead, there was a communal garden where the wolfless and the alphas worked side by side, their hands stained with the same dark, fertile soil. Elena Vance stood at the edge of the great waterfall, watching the mist catch the first rays of the morning sun. She no longer wore the heavy silks of the citadel or the mud-stained tunics of her past. She wore a simple dress of woven wool, and on her chest, where the lunar locket once hung, there was only a small, faint scar in the shape of a star, the mark where the solar core had finally settled into her soul, becoming part of her heartbeat rather than a tool to be wielded. Draven approached her from the shadows of the trees. He didn't move with the wary silence of a hunter anymore. He moved with the steady, grounded pace of a man who knew he was coming home. He stopped beside her, his hand finding hers. The rough calluses of his palms felt like a map of everything they had survived. "The census is in," Draven said, his voice a low, warm rumble that no longer held the edge of iron. "We've had 12 new arrivals this week. 3 are from the Stone Claw, and a family of Omegas from the southern coast. They're calling this place the Sanctuary of the Star." Elena leaned her head against his shoulder. "It's not a sanctuary, Draven. It's just a home. A place where they don't have to be something to be someone." She looked toward the distant ridge, where the Silver Moon territory began. In the early light, she saw a flicker of movement, a gray cloak disappearing into the thicket. Kenzo was still there, a silent sentinel who guarded the borders of a kingdom he would never truly enter. He had sent a letter a month ago, not a plea for forgiveness, but a report on a rogue hunter group he had intercepted. Elena hadn't replied, but she had left a small bundle of healing herbs and bread at the boundary stone. It wasn't a reconciliation, but it was a truce. It was the beginning of a different kind of healing, the kind that takes years of quiet, consistent work. "Do you ever miss it?" Draven asked, his eyes searching hers. "The power? The way the world bowed when you shifted?" Elena smiled, and it was a human smile, bright, sincere, and filled with a peace that no golden Luna form could ever capture. She looked at the village below, at the smoke rising from chimneys, and the sound of children laughing as they headed to the stream. "The world only bows because it's afraid of falling," Elena said softly. "I'd much rather walk beside it." As the sun rose higher, the golden light of the valley intensified, but it wasn't the blinding, destructive fire of the execution stand. It was the soft, persistent glow of a new day. Elena and Draven turned together and began the walk back down to the village, their shadows stretching long and united behind them. The girl who had been brought to the block to die was gone. The queen who had risen to burn the world had found her peace. What remained was simply Elena, a woman who knew that the greatest power wasn't in the wolf, but in the hand that reached out to hold another in the dark. Thank you for joining us for this journey of betrayal and light. If Elena's rise from the execution stand moved you, and if you found hope in the quiet strength of the Eclipse Pack, please like this video and share it with those who believe that our scars are just where the light gets in. Subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated on our weekly cinematic tales. Next week, we delve into the mystery of the Midnight Heir, a story of a lost prince and a bond that defies time. Who was your favorite character today? Let us know in the comments. Keep your pack close and your heart open.